My hands shook as I fumbled with the car keys, Sophia's terrified whimpers cutting through the chaos in my mind. Derek's words still echoed like poison. Those people will pay good money for you both. Fresh meat always sells well. The gun in his hand had been steady, his eyes cold with a calculation that made my blood freeze. 29 years on this earth, and I'd never felt so helpless. "Mommy, I'm scared," Sophia whispered from the passenger seat, her small fingers clutching Mr. Whiskers, the stuffed cat she'd had since birth. Her green eyes, so much like mine, were wide with terror. "We're going to be okay, baby," I lied, pulling into Manhattan traffic. The windshield wipers fought against the downpour, each sweep revealing glimpses of a city that suddenly felt hostile. Derek had finally snapped completely. The gambling debts, the cocaine habit, the mounting pressure from people I didn't want to imagine. It had all culminated in tonight's nightmare. I'd met Derek 3 years ago at a hospital fundraiser. He'd been charming then, a decorated police officer who seemed like the stability Sophia and I needed after her father died. What a fool I'd been. The first red flag should have been how quickly he moved in, how eager he was to control our lives. But I'd been lonely, overwhelmed by single motherhood and the demands of my psychology practice. The Bella Notte restaurant appeared like salvation through the rain-streaked windshield, its warm golden light spilling onto the wet streets. I'd driven aimlessly for 20 minutes, but something about this place felt safe. Expensive cars lined the street. Mercedes, BMWs, a gleaming Maserati. People with money, people with power, people who might help us. "Come on, sweetheart." I lifted Sophia from the car, her 6-year-old frame trembling against my chest. The bruises on my forearm throbbed where Derek had grabbed me, dark fingerprints already forming on my pale skin. The doorman nodded respectfully as we entered, his eyes taking in our disheveled state with professional discretion. Inside, the restaurant hummed with quiet elegance. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across cream-colored walls adorned with original artwork. The scent of garlic and expensive wine mingled with the soft murmur of sophisticated conversation. This was a world I'd glimpsed but never inhabited. A place where power brokers and influential families dined in refined luxury. The maitre d' approached with polished professionalism, his Italian accent lending warmth to his greeting. "Good evening, signora. How may we assist you tonight?" I opened my mouth to speak, but Sophia broke free from my arms. She ran straight toward a corner table where a man sat alone, his presence commanding even in solitude. Dark hair swept back from a face that could have been carved from marble, sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw darkened by 5 o'clock shadow, eyes the color of storm clouds. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary, but it was the way he carried himself that made everyone else fade into background noise. There was an aura of controlled danger about him, like a predator masquerading as a gentleman. "Please, help my mommy!" Sophia's voice cracked with desperation, her small hands gripping the edge of his table. "The bad man wants to sell us. He has a gun, and he's going to give us to scary people." The stranger's eyes snapped to her, then to me. I watched something shift in his expression. Surprise, then a focused intensity that made my breath catch. He was older than me, maybe mid-30s, with the kind of quiet authority that didn't need to announce itself. When he moved, it was with the fluid grace of someone accustomed to being in control. "Sophia, come back here," I called, rushing forward, but my voice sounded weak even to my own ears. The man, this beautiful, dangerous stranger, slowly set down his wine glass. His gaze traveled over Sophia's tear-stained face, then lifted to assess me. I felt exposed under his scrutiny, aware of my disheveled appearance, the fear I couldn't hide, the bruises I hadn't bothered to cover. My usually neat auburn hair hung in damp tendrils around my face, and my simple blue dress was wrinkled from our desperate flight. "What's your name, little one?" he asked Sophia, his voice low and surprisingly gentle. There was something in his tone, a careful control that suggested volcanic emotions held in check. "Sophia Wright. That's my mommy, Joanne. The bad man has a gun and he wants to hurt us." Her words tumbled out in a rush, complete trust radiating from her small form. The stranger's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. A muscle jumped near his temple, the only sign of whatever storm was building behind those granite eyes. He looked past me toward the restaurant's entrance, and I followed his gaze to see Derek's silhouette through the glass doors. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard, I wondered if he could hear it. He followed us, I whispered, instinctively moving closer to Sophia. The man stood in one fluid motion, his full height impressive. He was at least 6'3", broad shoulders filling out his suit jacket perfectly. With movements that seemed almost casual, he reached into his pocket and withdrew a phone. The gesture was unhurried, but there was something predatory in the way his eyes never left Derek's figure outside. "Vincent," he said quietly into the device, his voice carrying an authority that raised goosebumps on my arms. "We have a situation at Bella Notte. 2 guests require immediate assistance. Handle the armed individual in the parking area. Carefully. He's a police officer, but I suspect not a clean one. Standard protocol for threats to civilians under our protection." I stared at him in shock. How had he known Derek was armed? How had he known Derek was a cop? Within seconds, I saw movement through the rain-streaked windows. Black SUVs materialized from the darkness like phantoms, surrounding Derek's beat-up Honda with military precision. Men in dark suits emerged from the vehicles, tall, broad-shouldered figures who moved with the same controlled grace as the man beside me. "Who are you?" I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. His storm-gray eyes met mine, and I saw something flicker there. Calculation, protectiveness, and something darker I couldn't name. Something that should have terrified me but instead made me feel safer than I had in months. "Someone who doesn't tolerate men who threaten children," he replied simply. "Or women who clearly need protection." Through the window, I watched Derek's face change from arrogance to fear as he found himself surrounded. One of the men approached his car window. Tall, silver-haired, with the bearing of someone accustomed to delivering unpleasant news to unpleasant people. "My associate is explaining to your friend that he has 48 hours to disappear from this city," the stranger continued, his tone conversational despite the gravity of his words. "He's also ensuring that Mr. Collins can be monitored should he choose to ignore this generous advice. A small tracking device, nothing too invasive." I should have been terrified. This man clearly had resources, connections, power that operated outside the law. The casual way he orchestrated Derek's intimidation suggested this wasn't his first time dealing with threats. Instead, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Safety. Sophia had moved even closer to the stranger, her natural child's instinct for protection overriding any stranger. Danger warnings I'd drilled into her. She looked up at him with complete trust, and I envied her ability to read people so clearly. "Will the bad man go away forever?" she asked, her voice small but hopeful. The stranger knelt to her level, his harsh features softening in a way that made my chest tighten unexpectedly. Up close, I could see he had long, dark eyelashes that any woman would envy, and a small scar near his left temple that spoke of a violent past. "He won't hurt you again, Sophia. I promise you that." His voice carried such conviction that even I believed him completely. It was a promise no stranger should make to a child he'd just met. Yet somehow, looking into his eyes, I knew he meant every word, and that he had the power to keep it. The ride to his mansion felt like entering another world entirely. The black Mercedes glided through Manhattan streets with whisper-quiet luxury, its leather interior scented with cedar and something distinctly masculine that made my pulse skip erratically. Sophia had fallen asleep against my shoulder within minutes, exhaustion finally claiming her small body. "She's been through enough for one night," the stranger said quietly, his storm-gray eyes studying us in the rearview mirror. "My home is secure. You'll both be safe there." I shifted uncomfortably under his penetrating gaze. "I don't even know your name." "Raphael Montesani." He said it simply, as if the name shouldn't mean anything to me. But it did. My blood chilled as recognition hit. I'd seen that surname in newspaper headlines, whispered in conversations about New York's most powerful families. The Montesanis weren't just wealthy. They were untouchable, dangerous, connected to things decent people pretended didn't exist. I couldn't finish the sentence. "A businessman," he supplied smoothly. among other things. The understatement would have been laughable if it weren't so terrifying. Raphael Montesani was rumored to control half of Manhattan's underground economy. People crossed the street to avoid his associates. Politicians took his calls at midnight. And now I was in his car, dependent on his protection. "Why are you helping us?" My voice came out smaller than I intended. His eyes met mine in the mirror again, and I saw something flicker there, something almost vulnerable beneath the controlled exterior. "Children shouldn't be afraid in their own homes," he said finally. "Neither should their mothers." The mansion appeared through wrought iron gates that opened silently at our approach. I'd driven past places like this 1,000 times, wondering what kind of lives played out behind those pristine facades. The building rose before us like something from a Gothic novel, all clean lines and towering windows, softly lit from within. Perfectly manicured gardens flanked the circular driveway, where a fountain whispered secrets to the night air. "Welcome to my home," Raphael said, as the car stopped beneath a portico that could have sheltered half my apartment building. A man emerged from the shadows, tall, impeccably dressed, with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. "Mr. Montesani," he said with a slight Italian accent. "Everything has been prepared as requested." "Thank you, Vincent. This is Ms. Wright and her daughter Sophia. They'll be staying with us indefinitely." Vincent's gaze swept over us with professional assessment, taking in our disheveled state without judgment. "Of course, sir. Shall I show them to their quarters?" "In a moment." Raphael moved around the car to open my door, his movements fluid despite his obvious size and strength. When he reached for Sophia, I instinctively pulled back. "I can carry her. She's exhausted, and you're shaking." His observation was matter of fact, not unkind. "Let me help." There was something in his tone, a careful gentleness that didn't match his dangerous reputation. Reluctantly, I allowed him to lift Sophia from my arms. She stirred slightly, then settled against his broad chest with complete trust that both amazed and terrified me. The interior of the mansion was breathtaking. Marble floors gleamed under crystal chandeliers, and original artwork lined walls that soared to impossible heights. But it was the way Raphael moved through this opulent space that commanded attention, like a king surveying his domain, completely at ease with the power that surrounded him. "This way," he said, leading us up a sweeping staircase that belonged in a museum. Sophia barely stirred as he carried her, her small hand clutching the fabric of his expensive suit jacket. Something twisted in my chest as I watched this dangerous man treat my daughter with such careful tenderness. The guest suite he showed us to was larger than my entire apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the garden, and the bed was big enough for 4 people. Raphael laid Sophia down gently, then stepped back to give me space to tuck her in properly. "There's a connecting room if you prefer privacy," he said quietly, "but many find it comforting to stay close the first night." "The first night?" I turned to face him fully. "How long exactly do you expect us to stay here?" His expression grew serious. "That depends on how long it takes to resolve your Derek problem permanently." The way he said permanently sent chills down my spine. What exactly does that mean? Raphael moved to the window, gazing out at his perfectly controlled domain. "Your stepfather isn't just an abusive husband, Joanne. He's a corrupt police officer with dangerous debts to even more dangerous people." "What kind of debts?" "The kind that get paid in blood if they're not satisfied with cash." He turned back to me, his face grave. "Derek Collins owes $200,000 to the Gulf Cartel. Money he lost when a drug shipment he was supposed to protect got intercepted by honest federal agents." My legs gave out. I sank into a nearby chair, mind reeling. Drugs? Derek was involved with drug dealers. Worse, he was their inside man, providing police escort for cocaine shipments, tipping them off about raids, eliminating evidence when necessary. Raphael's voice was clinical, but I caught the disgust underneath. When that last shipment was seized, the cartel held him responsible for the loss. And now he wants to use Sophia and me as, I couldn't say it, collateral. A gesture of good faith while he finds other ways to repay what he owes. Raphael's jaw tightened. The Gulf Cartel has a particular market for women and children who won't be missed. Derek convinced them you both fit that description. Bile rose in my throat. The man I'd shared a bed with, who'd helped Sophia with her homework, who'd sworn to protect us both. He'd been planning to sell us like cattle. How do you know all this? I whispered. Because the Gulf Cartel operates in my territory. Because Derek reached out to my competitors first, trying to negotiate safe passage through New York. Because when my people investigated the threat to you, they discovered exactly what kind of monster had been living in your home. The casual way he spoke of having people investigate Derek's activities should have terrified me. Instead, I felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time in months, someone with real power was on my side. What do you want in return? I asked, because men like Rafael Montesani never did anything without expecting payment. He studied me for a long moment, something unreadable flickering in those storm-gray eyes. I want you and Sophia to be safe. I want that child to sleep without nightmares. I want you to stop looking over your shoulder every time you leave your house. That's not an answer. It's the only answer you're getting tonight. His voice softened as he glanced at Sophia's sleeping form. Tomorrow we'll discuss the details of your stay here. For now, just rest. You're under my protection, which means you're untouchable. As he moved toward the door, I found myself calling after him. Why do you care? You don't know us. Raphael paused, his hand on the doorframe. When he looked back, I saw something raw and vulnerable cross his features, because some lines should never be crossed, he said quietly. And men who threaten children cross all of them. The door closed behind him with a soft click, leaving me alone with my sleeping daughter and the growing realization that our lives had just changed forever. Outside those windows lay Rafael Montesani's world, beautiful, dangerous, and completely beyond my understanding. But for the first time in months, I felt truly safe. Morning sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting golden patterns across the marble floors of our temporary sanctuary. Sophia had awakened early, her natural curiosity overcoming the trauma of the previous night. She stood at the window in her pajamas, pressing her small hands against the glass as she watched gardeners tend to Raphael's pristine grounds. "Mommy, look at the pretty flowers," she whispered, her voice filled with wonder. "And there's a fountain that sparkles like diamonds." I joined her at the window, wrapping my arms around her small frame. The estate stretched beyond anything I'd ever imagined. Manicured lawns that belonged in magazines, rose gardens that must have cost more than most people's houses, and stone pathways that wound through carefully orchestrated beauty. It was a world so far removed from our modest apartment that it felt like stepping into a fairy tale. "It is beautiful, sweetheart," I agreed, though unease still twisted in my stomach. Beautiful cages were still cages. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. "Come in," I called, expecting Vincent or perhaps one of the other staff members I'd glimpsed the night before. Instead, Raphael entered carrying a silver tray laden with breakfast. He'd traded his formal suit for dark jeans and a charcoal cashmere sweater that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. Somehow, this casual version of him was even more unsettling. It made him seem less like a distant crime lord, and more like a man who could slip past my defenses without me noticing. "I thought you might prefer to eat privately this morning," he said, setting the tray on the sitting area's elegant coffee table. "But tomorrow I'd like you to join me for breakfast in the main dining room." Sophia abandoned her window vigil and bounded over to investigate the offerings. Her eyes widened at the sight of fresh strawberries, fluffy pancakes shaped like hearts, and what appeared to be homemade hot chocolate topped with real whipped cream. "Did you make this?" she asked Raphael with the direct honesty only children possessed. "My chef prepared it," he replied, crouching to her level with that same careful gentleness I'd noticed the night before. "But I told him you might like heart-shaped pancakes." "Was I right?" Sophia nodded enthusiastically, already reaching for a strawberry. "They're perfect. Mommy, look how pretty everything is." I watched this interaction with growing confusion. The media painted Rafael Montesani as a ruthless businessman with ties to organized crime. Yet here he was, ensuring a 6-year-old's breakfast included whimsical touches that would make her smile. The contradiction was jarring. "Thank you," I said quietly. "You didn't have to go to such trouble." It wasn't trouble. His storm-gray eyes met mine, and I felt that familiar flutter in my chest that I absolutely could not afford to feel. Sophia deserves to feel safe and cared for. As do you. The way he said it, with such quiet conviction, made my throat tighten unexpectedly. When was the last time anyone had cared about my well-being without expecting something in return? I need to call my work, I said, desperate to focus on practical matters. Let them know I won't be in for a while. Already handled. Raphael straightened to his full imposing height. I had Vincent contact your clinic this morning. You've been granted indefinite family leave due to a personal emergency. Your position will be waiting when you're ready to return. You can't just rearrange my life, I protested, even as part of me felt relieved. I can when it keeps you alive. His tone brooked no argument. Derek knows where you work, Joanne. He knows your routines, your weaknesses. Until he's neutralized, you don't go anywhere without protection. The reminder of Derek's threat sobered me instantly. Raphael was right, of course. My independent streak would have to take a backseat to survival. What about Sophia's school? I asked. She can't miss too much. St. Catherine's Academy has agreed to accept her immediately, Raphael replied. It's a private institution with excellent security protocols. She'll have discreet protection, and their academic standards are far superior to her previous school. I stared at him. St. Catherine's has a waiting list 3 years long, and the tuition is already paid, he finished calmly. Consider it an investment in Sophia's future. Before I could protest further, Sophia tugged on Raphael's sweater. What's that? She asked, pointing to a chess set positioned near the window. It's a game called chess, Raphael explained, his entire demeanor softening when he spoke to her. Would you like me to teach you how to play? For the next hour, I watched in fascination as this dangerous man patiently explained chess basics to my daughter. He showed her how each piece moved, creating elaborate stories about brave knights and powerful queens that made Sophia giggle with delight. His large hands dwarfed the delicate pieces, but he handled them with surprising grace. The queen is the strongest piece on the board, he told Sophia seriously. She can move anywhere she wants, and the whole game revolves around protecting the king and queen. Like you protect Mommy and me? Sophia asked innocently. Raphael's eyes flicked to mine before returning to Sophia. Exactly like that, he said softly. Something dangerous unfurled in my chest at his words. I couldn't afford to read meaning into his kindness. Couldn't let myself believe this was anything more than temporary sanctuary. But watching him with Sophia, seeing the genuine affection in his eyes, the careful way he praised her small victories, made it hard to remember he was supposed to be dangerous. That afternoon, while Sophia napped, Raphael showed me through parts of his mansion. The library was particularly stunning. Floor-to-ceiling mahogany shelves filled with leather-bound volumes, comfortable reading chairs positioned near tall windows, and the faint scent of aged paper and expensive whiskey. You read psychology texts, I observed, noting several familiar titles among the collection. Know Thy Enemy, he replied with a slight smile that didn't reach his eyes. Understanding human behavior is essential in my line of work. And what exactly is your line of work? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted the honest answer. Raphael was quiet for a long moment, studying my face as if weighing how much truth I could handle. I manage certain business interests that operate outside traditional corporate structures, he said finally. Import and export primarily, some real estate development, investment opportunities that require discretion. It was a carefully sanitized version of whatever he actually did, but I appreciated that he wasn't lying outright. The less I knew about his criminal activities, the safer I'd be if this situation ever went sideways. Your daughter is remarkable, he said, changing the subject as we moved into a sitting room decorated in warm earth tones. Intelligent, resilient, trusting despite everything she's been through. You've raised her well. Pride swelled in my chest. She's the best thing I've ever done. It shows. Raphael's expression grew serious. I want you to know, Joanne, whatever happens with Derek, whatever you decide about staying here, Sophia will always be protected. I give you my word on that. The intensity in his voice made my breath catch. There was something almost vulnerable in the way he spoke about Sophia, as if her welfare had become personally important to him in the span of a single day. Why? I whispered. Why do you care so much about strangers? Raphael moved closer, close enough that I caught his scent, cedar and spice and something uniquely masculine that made my pulse quicken. When he reached out to touch my face, I should have stepped back. Instead, I found myself leaning into the warmth of his palm. "You're not strangers anymore," he said quietly. "The moment Sophia asked for my help, the moment I saw the fear in your eyes, you became mine to protect." The possessive way he said mine should have alarmed me. Instead, it sent heat spiraling through my veins. This was dangerous territory, allowing myself to be attracted to a man whose world operated by rules I couldn't begin to understand. But as Raphael's thumb traced my cheekbone with infinite gentleness, I realized the danger might be worth it. Vincent's urgent knock shattered the peaceful morning routine Sophia and I had begun to establish at the mansion. It was our second week under Raphael's protection, and I'd foolishly started to believe Derek might have given up, might have disappeared like Raphael had warned him to. "Mr. Montesani requests your immediate presence in his study," Vincent said, his usually composed demeanor strained. "It's regarding your former residence." My blood chilled. Something had happened at our apartment. Raphael was pacing behind his massive mahogany desk when I entered, his jaw set in a hard line that spoke of barely contained fury. Scattered across the polished surface were photographs that made my stomach lurch, pictures of our apartment, but not as I'd left it. "He was there," Raphael said without preamble, his storm-gray eyes meeting mine with an intensity that made me step backward involuntarily. "Derek broke into your apartment last night." The photographs told a story of violation and rage. Furniture overturned, Sophia's toys scattered and broken, my bedroom torn apart with methodical cruelty. But it was the message spray-painted across our living room wall in violent red letters that made my knees give out. "You can't hide forever, bitch. They're coming for you." "Oh God," I whispered, sinking into the leather chair across from his desk. "He's completely lost his mind." "This wasn't random destruction," Raphael said, his voice deadly quiet. "This was calculated intimidation. A message meant to flush you out of hiding." He picked up another photograph, this one showing Derek's patrol car parked brazenly outside our building. He's not trying to be subtle anymore. I stared at the evidence of Derek's escalation, my hands trembling. "How did you get these pictures so quickly?" "Because I've had surveillance on your apartment since the night you came to me," Raphael replied matter-of-factly. "I needed to know if Derek would return, and when." He moved around the desk to crouch beside my chair, his presence both comforting and overwhelming. "Joanne, there's more you need to know about your stepfather. Things that change everything." Something in his tone made dread pool in my stomach. "What kind of things?" Raphael returned to his desk and opened a thick manila folder. "Derek Collins isn't just an abusive husband with gambling problems. He's a corrupt police officer who's been working with the Gulf Cartel for over 3 years. The words hit me like physical blows. That's impossible. Derek may be a bastard, but he's not a criminal. He's just a facilitator for cocaine shipments moving through New York." Raphael interrupted, sliding documents across to me. Bank records showing deposits that far exceed his police salary. Communications with known cartel operatives. Photos of him providing escort services for drug convoys. I stared at the evidence with growing horror. Bank statements showing mysterious deposits of $10, $15, sometimes $20,000. Grainy surveillance photos of Derek in uniform, standing beside vehicles I now recognized as cartel transport trucks. Text messages discussing merchandise and delivery schedules in code that wasn't difficult to decipher. "But why?" I whispered. "Why would he risk everything for drug money?" "Because Derek owes the Gulf Cartel $200,000. Raphael said grimly. 3 months ago, he was supposed to provide police escort for a major cocaine shipment. Instead, honest federal agents intercepted the convoy. The cartel lost millions in product, and they held Derek responsible. My mind reeled, trying to process this revelation. The Derek I'd known, controlling, violent, but still a police officer who'd sworn to uphold the law, had been living a double life I never could have imagined. "The night you came to me, Derek was desperate," Raphael continued. He'd already approached several criminal organizations, trying to negotiate safe passage out of New York. When they all turned him down, he decided to offer the cartel something else as collateral for his debt. "Sophia and me," I realized with dawning horror. "You and Sophia," he confirmed. 2 untraceable women who could disappear without anyone asking difficult questions. The cartel has specific markets for that kind of merchandise. Bile rose in my throat. I pressed my hands to my mouth, fighting the urge to vomit. The man I'd shared a bed with, who'd helped Sophia with her math homework, who'd promised to protect us both. He'd been planning to sell us like cattle to pay his debts. "There's something else," Raphael said quietly, and the gentleness in his voice made me look up. Something about Sophia's father. My heart stopped. "Michael? What about Michael? He died in a car accident 4 years ago." Michael Wright discovered Derek's criminal activities, Raphael said carefully, as if handling explosive material. He found evidence of the drug money, the cartel connections. He was going to the FBI. "No," I breathed. But even as I said it, pieces began clicking into place. Michael's increasing paranoia in the weeks before his death, his insistence that something was wrong with Derek, his refusal to let Derek babysit Sophia anymore. "Derek sabotaged your husband's car," Raphael said with devastating gentleness, "made it look like brake failure. Michael Wright didn't die in an accident, Joanne. He was murdered to keep him quiet." The words hit me like a freight train. Everything I'd believed about my life, about Michael's death, about Derek's place in our family, all lies. I doubled over in my chair, grief and rage warring in my chest until I couldn't breathe. "I'm sorry," Raphael said, and suddenly he was kneeling beside me, his large hands gentle on my shoulders. "I'm so sorry you had to learn this way. He killed Michael," I sobbed, the reality finally sinking in. "He killed my husband, and then he married me. He's been planning this all along, hasn't he? Getting close to us, gaining our trust, waiting for the right moment to—" "Hey," Raphael said firmly, his hands framing my face, forcing me to look at him. "Listen to me. Derek Collins will never touch you or Sophia again. I give you my word on that." Something in his voice, a lethal promise that went beyond mere protection, made me believe him completely. This man, this dangerous stranger, who'd become our sanctuary, would kill Derek without hesitation if necessary. And God help me. I was grateful for it. "I should have known," I whispered, tears streaming down my cheeks. "I should have seen the signs, should have protected Michael, should have—" "Stop." Raphael's thumbs brushed away my tears with infinite tenderness. "You couldn't have known. Derek is a skilled manipulator who spent years perfecting his deception. None of this is your fault." For a moment, we stayed frozen like that. His hands on my face, my tears falling onto his wrists, the weight of revelation hanging between us. I was acutely aware of his proximity, the heat radiating from his body, the way his breathing had quickened slightly. "Joanne," he said softly, and I heard something raw in his voice that made my pulse skip. Before I could respond, before I could think about all the reasons this was dangerous, I found myself leaning forward. He met me halfway, his arms wrapping around me as I collapsed against his chest. It should have been simple comfort, a protective embrace between allies. Instead, it felt like coming home to a place I'd never known I was looking for. Raphael held me while I grieved for Michael, for the innocence I'd lost, for the naive woman who'd believed Derek's lies. His hands moved over my hair, my back, offering silent comfort that spoke louder than words. Against his solid chest, surrounded by his warmth and strength, I finally felt safe enough to fall apart completely. And when I did, Raphael caught every broken piece. 3 weeks into our stay at Raphael's mansion, I'd begun to believe we might actually be safe. Sophia had adapted remarkably well to St. Catherine's Academy, making friends with the privileged daughters of Manhattan's elite. Every morning, 2 of Raphael's men would discreetly escort her to school in an unmarked sedan, then position themselves strategically around the campus throughout the day. It was a Tuesday afternoon when my carefully constructed sense of security shattered completely. My phone rang while I was reading in Raphael's library, Sophia's favorite book of fairy tales open in my lap as I waited for her return. The caller ID showed St. Catherine's main office, and something cold settled in my stomach before I even answered. "Ms. Wright, this is Principal Morrison," came the crisp voice. "I need you to come to the school immediately. There's been an incident involving Sophia." My blood turned to ice. What kind of incident? Is she hurt? She's perfectly safe, the principal assured me quickly. But there was an attempted abduction during afternoon recess. Our security protocols worked exactly as intended, and the perpetrators were apprehended by your security detail. The phone slipped from my nerveless fingers, clattering to the marble floor. Through the library's tall windows, I could see Raphael's black Mercedes speeding up the circular driveway, moving faster than usual. He must have received the call simultaneously. I met him in the foyer, and one look at his face told me everything I needed to know. His storm-gray eyes burned with a fury so cold it took my breath away. This wasn't the controlled anger I'd seen before. This was something primal, deadly, barely contained beneath his civilized exterior. "Where is she?" I demanded, my voice cracking with panic. "Safe. Vincent is bringing her home now." Raphael's voice was carefully modulated, but I could hear the volcanic rage simmering beneath. 2 men tried to take her from the playground. They had a van waiting, sedatives, zip ties, professional equipment. The clinical way he described the attempted kidnapping made my knees weak. I gripped the marble banister to keep from falling. "Gulf Cartel?" I whispered. "Derek's friends," Raphael confirmed, and something in his tone made me step back instinctively. "They were going to drug my little girl and stuff her into a van like a piece of cargo." The possessive way he said "my little girl" should have alarmed me. Instead, it filled me with fierce gratitude. Sophia had become precious to him, not just as my daughter, but as someone he genuinely loved and would die to protect. The front door opened, and Vincent entered carrying Sophia in his arms. She was crying, her small face pressed against the older man's shoulder, but she appeared physically unharmed. The moment she saw Raphael, she reached for him with desperate urgency. "Papa Rafa," she sobbed, using the name she'd started calling him the week before. "The bad men tried to take me, but Uncle Vincent scared them away." Raphael gathered her against his chest with infinite gentleness, his large hand stroking her hair, as he murmured soothing words in Italian. But over Sophia's head, his eyes met mine, and I saw something that chilled me to the bone. This was a man preparing for war. "What happened to the men who tried to take her?" I asked Vincent quietly. "Detained for questioning," Vincent replied with diplomatic vagueness that told me everything I needed to know. That evening, after Sophia had been fed, bathed, and tucked safely into bed with extra security posted outside her room, I found myself unable to sleep. The attempted kidnapping had shattered any illusion of safety I'd been clinging to. Derek wasn't giving up. He was escalating, becoming more desperate and dangerous. I padded barefoot through the mansion's corridors, drawn toward the warm light spilling from Raphael's study. The door was slightly ajar, and I could see him standing at the window, a glass of whiskey untouched in his hand. He'd shed his suit jacket and rolled up his sleeves, revealing powerful forearms that spoke of violence held in check. "You should be sleeping," he said without turning around, somehow sensing my presence. "So should you." I stepped into the study, closing the door behind me. The space felt intimate in the low lamplight, filled with the scent of leather and expensive whiskey. Raphael turned to face me, and I caught my breath at the raw emotion in his expression. This man who controlled half of Manhattan with ruthless efficiency looked haunted, vulnerable in a way that made my chest ache. "I failed her," he said quietly. "I promised Sophia she would be safe, and I almost lost her today." "You didn't fail anyone," I said firmly, moving closer. "Your men stopped them. She's upstairs sleeping peacefully because you protected her. Derek has crossed every line," Raphael continued, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "First he terrorizes you, then destroys your home, and now he tries to steal my daughter. There's only one way this ends." The possessive claim over Sophia should have bothered me. Instead, it filled me with warmth. She was his daughter now, in every way that mattered. "Raphael," I said softly, reaching out to touch his arm. The contact sent electricity racing up my spine, and I saw his pupils dilate in response. "You shouldn't be here," he warned, but he didn't step away. "Not tonight. I'm not thinking clearly. Maybe that's exactly what you need," I whispered, stepping closer until I could feel the heat radiating from his body. "To stop thinking and just feel." Something snapped in his expression. Before I could draw another breath, his hands were framing my face, his mouth crashing down on mine with desperate hunger. The kiss was everything I'd imagined, and nothing I'd prepared for. Fierce, consuming, tasting of whiskey and dangerous promises. His arms wrapped around me, pulling me against the solid warmth of his chest as I melted into him completely. This was madness. Kissing a man whose world operated by rules I couldn't understand. But his mouth on mine felt like coming alive after months of merely existing. Joanne. He breathed against my lips, his voice rough with desire. You have no idea what you do to me. Before I could respond, the study door burst open. Vincent stood in the doorway, his usually composed expression tight with urgency. Sir, we have a situation, he announced, then stopped short when he realized what he'd interrupted. Forgive me, but this cannot wait. Raphael's arms tightened around me protectively before he reluctantly released me. What is it? Derek Collins has made contact with Gulf Cartel leadership. They're demanding immediate delivery of the collateral he promised, or they'll take alternative collection methods. Our sources suggest they're planning to escalate significantly within the next 24 hours. The blood drained from Raphael's face. How significantly? Direct assault on this residence, Vincent replied grimly. They know you have the woman and child here, and they're willing to go to war to collect them. Raphael was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working as he processed this information. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute decision. Prepare the safe house. I want Joanne and Sophia moved within the hour. No, I said firmly, surprising both men. I'm not running anymore, and I'm not letting you face this alone. Raphael turned to me, his eyes blazing with equal parts admiration and frustration. This isn't your fight. It became my fight the moment Derek decided to sell my daughter, I replied. Go handle Derek. End this nightmare. But come back to us. The words hung in the air between us, heavy with implication. This wasn't just about protection anymore. Somewhere in the past 3 weeks we'd become a family. Unconventional, dangerous, but real. Raphael cupped my face in his hands, pressing his forehead to mine. Derek has gone too far, he said quietly, his voice carrying lethal promise. No one touches what's mine and lives to tell about it. As he strode from the study with Vincent at his side, I pressed my fingers to my lips where the taste of him still lingered. Whatever was coming, I knew our lives would never be the same. But for the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't afraid of the future. I was ready to fight for it. Raphael left the mansion before dawn, his movements silent and predatory as he prepared for what he knew would be the final confrontation. I watched him from our bedroom window as he descended the front steps, his tall frame cutting an imposing silhouette against the pre-dawn darkness. The GPS tracker Vincent had placed on Derek's car had led them to an abandoned warehouse in Brooklyn, the kind of place where screams echoed and bodies disappeared without questions being asked. He'd kissed me goodbye with desperate intensity, his hands framing my face as if memorizing every detail. I'll come back to you, he'd promised, his storm-gray eyes burning with lethal resolve. Both of you. I spent the morning in a state of suspended anxiety, unable to focus on anything except the knowledge that somewhere across the city, the man I'd fallen in love with was hunting the monster who'd destroyed my family. Sophia seemed to sense my tension, staying closer to me than usual as we moved through our morning routine. Her small hand would find mine repeatedly, as if anchoring us both to normalcy. Is Papa Rafa coming back soon? She asked over breakfast, her green eyes wide with the intuitive worry that children possess when they sense danger lurking just beyond their understanding. Soon, sweetheart, I promised, praying I wasn't lying to her innocent face. He had some important business to take care of. Hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. Vincent maintained his professional calm, but I caught him checking his phone repeatedly, his weathered hands betraying the slightest tremor as he scrolled through messages. His jaw was tight with concern for his employer, and I knew that despite his composed exterior, he was as worried as I was. The mansion felt hollow without Raphael's commanding presence, as if the very walls were holding their breath, waiting for their master's return. I tried reading, tried helping Sophia with a puzzle, tried anything to distract my racing mind, but every shadow that moved past the windows made my heart jump. Every creak of the old house settling made me freeze with anticipation. By afternoon, I'd worn a path in the library carpet from my restless pacing. It was nearly midnight when I finally heard the front door open. I'd been pacing the library for hours, unable to sleep, my heart hammering against my ribs with each passing minute. The sound of Raphael's footsteps, heavy, tired, but unmistakably alive, nearly brought me to my knees with overwhelming relief. When he appeared in the doorway, my breath caught in my throat. His expensive charcoal suit was rumpled and stained with what looked like oil, dirt, and darker substances I didn't want to identify. His knuckles were scraped and bloodied, his white shirt torn at the shoulder, and there was a hardness in his storm-gray eyes that hadn't been there before. A coldness that spoke of violence witnessed and justice delivered. But he was whole, uninjured, breathing, alive. "It's over," he said simply, his voice rough with exhaustion and something darker, more primal. "Derek won't be a problem anymore. Not for you, not for Sophia, not for anyone." I searched his face, looking for answers to questions I wasn't sure I wanted to ask. The man before me looked like a warrior returning from battle, transformed by what he'd done in those Brooklyn shadows. "What happened?" I whispered, moving closer despite the dangerous aura that surrounded him like smoke. Raphael moved to the whiskey decanter with careful, measured steps, pouring himself a generous measure with hands that trembled almost imperceptibly. The crystal clinked against the bottle neck, the only sound in the heavy silence that stretched between us. "I found him exactly where the tracker said he'd be," Raphael began, his voice taking on a clinical quality that somehow made the story more chilling. "Brooklyn warehouse, meeting with Gulf Cartel leadership. 3 of them, middle management types who thought they could operate in my territory without consequences." He took a long swallow of whiskey before continuing, the amber liquid seeming to steady him. Derek was trying to negotiate a new timeline for delivering his collateral, begging for more time while offering them detailed descriptions of what they could expect. "Sophia and me," I said quietly, my voice barely audible. "You and Sophia," he confirmed, and something volcanic flickered in his expression. A rage so deep and controlled it was terrifying. He told them he could deliver you both within the week, described in detail what they could expect from a fresh mother and her young daughter, said you'd both been properly broken in and would be obedient merchandise. Nausea rose in my throat like bile. The clinical way Derek had spoken about us, as if we were livestock to be bartered and sold, made my skin crawl with revulsion and horror. "There's more," Raphael continued, setting down his glass with such careful control that I knew he was fighting not to shatter it. "Derek confessed to everything. Not because he felt guilty, because he was proud of it. Proud of his planning, his patience, his execution." My legs gave out. I sank into the nearest leather chair, watching Raphael's face as he revealed the final pieces of my destroyed life. "He bragged about killing Michael," Raphael said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper that made the hair on my arms stand up. Said it wasn't as hard as he'd expected. Just a simple brake line cut, then playing the grieving friend at the funeral. He laughed about it, Joanne. Laughed while describing how your husband's car went off the road. Tears burned my eyes, but they were tears of rage rather than grief now. The man I'd shared my bed with, who'd helped Sophia with her homework, who'd sworn to protect us. He'd been a predator from the very beginning, calculating and patient as any hunting animal. He planned it all, I realized with dawning horror. The marriage, the relationship with Sophia, everything. He bragged about that too. Raphael continued, beginning to pace like a caged wolf. Said he'd played the long game perfectly. Kill the husband, seduce the widow, gain legal access to the child. When his debts came due, he'd have the perfect payment ready and waiting. No one would even look for you. The glass in Raphael's hand suddenly shattered. He'd gripped it too tightly without realizing, and now whiskey and blood dripped from his knuckles onto the Persian rug. But he didn't seem to notice the pain, too consumed by the memory of what he'd witnessed. That's when I knew talking was over, Raphael said with deadly quiet, examining his bleeding hand with detached interest. When he looked at those cartel bastards and laughed while describing how he was going to drug you both for easier transport. Said Sophia would fetch top dollar in their markets because she was young and untouched. What did you do? I whispered, though part of me already knew. Raphael's eyes met mine, and I saw something raw and protective there that took my breath away. Love and violence intertwined in a way that should have terrified me, but instead made me feel safer than I'd ever felt in my life. "I handled a loose end," he said simply, his voice carrying the weight of absolute finality. "Derek Collins will never threaten you or Sophia again. Neither will the Gulf Cartel members who were stupid enough to think they could operate in my territory, trafficking in children." I should have been horrified. A normal woman would have demanded details, called the police, run screaming from a man who could speak so casually about taking multiple lives. Instead, I felt only overwhelming relief washing over me like a cleansing tide. The nightmare that had consumed my life for months was finally, truly over. "Thank you," I said quietly, meaning it with every fiber of my being. Raphael looked genuinely surprised by my response, as if he'd expected condemnation rather than gratitude. "You're not afraid of me?" I stood and moved toward him, my heart pounding with something that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with love, desire, and desperate relief. "I'm afraid of losing you," I admitted, my voice breaking slightly. "I'm afraid of what my life would be like without you in it. Without us." Something fundamental shifted in his expression. The hardness melted away like ice in sunlight, replaced by raw vulnerability that made my chest ache with tenderness. "Joanne," he said, my name a prayer on his lips. "You saved us," I continued, stepping closer until I could feel the heat radiating from his powerful body. "You protected Sophia when no one else could. You gave us a home, a family, a future when we had nothing." His hands came up to frame my face, thumbs brushing away tears I hadn't realized were falling. His touch was infinitely gentle despite the blood on his knuckles, despite what those hands had done tonight in service of our protection. "You gave me something worth fighting for," he said softly, his voice rough with emotion. "Worth killing for, worth changing my entire life for." When he kissed me this time, it wasn't desperate or urgent like our previous encounters. It was claiming, possessive, full of promises that had nothing to do with mere protection and everything to do with forever. His mouth moved against mine with reverent hunger, as if he was memorizing the taste of victory and homecoming combined into one perfect moment. "Mine," he murmured against my lips, the word carrying weight of ownership and worship combined into something sacred. "Yours," I agreed completely, surrendering to the truth we'd both been fighting. "Always yours." What followed was inevitable, beautiful, and utterly transformative. Raphael made love to me with the desperate intensity of a man who'd almost lost everything precious to him. And I gave myself to him with the abandon of a woman finally free to love without fear. A morning news anchor's voice drifted through the mansion's breakfast room, her crisp, professional tone at odds with the intimate scene unfolding at Raphael's dining table. Sophia sat perched on Raphael's lap, carefully spreading jam on her toast, while he helped steady her small hands. The domestic normalcy of the moment felt surreal after everything we'd been through. Body of NYPD Detective Derek Collins was discovered in a Brooklyn warehouse early this morning. Sources close to the investigation suggest Collins may have been involved in drug trafficking operations connected to the Gulf Cartel. The case has been classified as gang-related violence, and the investigation has been expedited through federal channels. I reached for the remote, but Raphael's hand covered mine gently. "Let it finish," he said quietly. Collins had been under internal investigation for suspicious financial activities and was scheduled to meet with federal agents next week. Police Commissioner Janet Martinez stated that while the department doesn't condone vigilante justice, Collins' death appears to be the result of criminal associations rather than his police work. The case is expected to be closed within days. Raphael turned off the television with deliberate calm. Sophia continued eating her breakfast, blissfully unaware that the bad man who'd terrorized us was now permanently gone. For her, life had simply become safe, stable, and filled with love. "It's really over," I whispered, the weight of Derek's death settling over me. Not grief. I felt no sorrow for the man who'd murdered my husband and planned to sell my daughter, but relief so profound it left me lightheaded. "It's over," Raphael confirmed, his storm gray eyes meeting mine across the table. You and Sophia are completely safe now. 1 month had passed since that night in Brooklyn. 1 month of waking up in Raphael's arms, of watching Sophia blossom under his devoted attention, of slowly accepting that our nightmare had truly ended. The bruises on my arms had faded, replaced by gentle marks from Raphael's loving touch. Sophia's nightmares had stopped, replaced by peaceful sleep in her beautiful room. Surrounded by books and toys Raphael seemed to delight in providing. But questions lingered in the quiet moments. What kind of life were we building together? What kind of future could I give Sophia in Raphael's dangerous world? "Mommy, can Papa Rafa come to my school play next week?" Sophia asked, syrup decorating her chin as she grinned up at me. The casual way she called him Papa Rafa still made my chest tighten with emotion. In her 6-year-old heart, Raphael wasn't a crime lord or dangerous man. He was the father figure who read her bedtime stories, taught her chess, and made her feel utterly safe and loved. "Of course I can, Principessa," Raphael said, using the Italian endearment that made Sophia giggle every time. I wouldn't miss it. After Vincent took Sophia to school, Raphael and I found ourselves alone in his study. The same room where he'd first told me about Derek's criminal activities, where we'd shared our first desperate kiss, where he'd returned bloodied but victorious from ending our nightmare. "We need to talk," I said, settling into the leather chair across from his desk. Raphael leaned back in his chair, studying my face with that intense focus that still made my pulse quicken. "About our future. About what kind of future is possible," I corrected carefully. "Raphael, I love you. More than I thought possible. And Sophia adores you. You've become the father she never really had." "But?" he prompted, sensing the hesitation in my voice. "But I need to know what kind of life we're choosing. What kind of world I'm bringing my daughter into permanently." I took a shaky breath. "I know what you do. I know the risks. I've seen the violence your world requires. And part of me accepts that because you used it to protect us." Raphael's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "What are you asking me?" "I'm asking if you're willing to change. Not who you are. I fell in love with exactly who you are. But how you live. The dangerous parts of your business. The illegal activities. Can you step back from those gradually?" For a long moment, Raphael was quiet, his fingers steepled as he considered my words. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight I'd never heard before. 6 months ago, if anyone had asked me to consider leaving my family's traditional businesses, I would have laughed. He said slowly, "The Montesani name has been synonymous with power in this city for 3 generations. I inherited an empire built on strength, fear, and absolute control." He stood and moved to the window overlooking his manicured grounds, hands clasped behind his back. "Then a terrified little girl ran up to my table in a restaurant and begged me to save her mother," he continued. "And everything I thought I knew about what mattered changed in an instant." My heart clenched at the raw emotion in his voice. "You want to know what kind of man I'm willing to become for you and Sophia?" Raphael turned to face me, and I saw something vulnerable and determined in his expression. "I'm willing to become the man Sophia already thinks I am. The man who makes you feel safe without having to spill blood to do it." "What does that mean practically?" I asked softly. "It means gradually transferring my family's less legitimate operations to my associates who are better suited for that life," Raphael explained, moving back to sit on the edge of his desk closer to me. "It means focusing on our legal businesses, real estate development, legitimate import, export, the restaurant chains. We have enough clean money to live comfortably for several lifetimes. And your associates will accept that transition?" A ghost of his old dangerous smile appeared. "They'll accept whatever I decide. But honestly, many of them have been wanting more legitimate operations for years. The old ways are becoming too risky in the modern world." I studied his face, looking for any sign of resentment or reluctance. Instead, I saw only determination and something that looked like relief. "You've already been planning this," I realized, "since the night I first held Sophia while she slept," Raphael admitted. "She was so small, so trusting. The thought of her growing up afraid of what I do, of you constantly worrying about my safety, it became unbearable." He knelt beside my chair, taking my hands in his scarred ones. "Joanne, you and Sophia didn't just save my life that night in the restaurant. You saved my soul. You showed me what it means to have something more precious than power, more important than respect, earned through fear." Tears burned my eyes as his thumbs traced gentle circles on my palms. "Marry me," he said simply, "not because you need protection, not because Sophia needs a father figure, but because I love you both more than my own life. Because I want to build something beautiful and safe and real with you." The proposal wasn't a question. It was a promise, a declaration, a plea all wrapped into one. This dangerous, powerful man was offering to reshape his entire existence for the chance to be our husband and father. "I need conditions," I said carefully. Raphael's mouth quirked upward. "I'd be disappointed if you didn't. Name them. Complete transparency about your business dealings. If you say you're going legitimate, I need to know exactly what that process looks like and when." "Done. Sophia's safety and normal childhood are non-negotiable. She goes to regular school, has normal friends, participates in normal activities. No bodyguards she can see, no obvious signs of your old life." "Agreed, though I reserve the right to ensure discreet protection. And no more violence," I said firmly. "I know the Derek situation required extreme measures, and I'll never regret what you did to protect us. But going forward, we handle problems through legal channels." Raphael was quiet for a moment, and I held my breath. "That's the hardest one," he admitted finally. "Not because I enjoy violence, but because sometimes it's the most efficient solution to problems that threaten my family. I'm asking you to trust that there are other ways." "Then I'll learn other ways," he said simply. "For you, for Sophia, for the man I want to become." When he kissed me, it tasted like promises and new beginnings, like a future where love was stronger than fear, where family mattered more than power. "Yes," I whispered against his lips. "Yes, I'll marry you. Yes, we'll build this life together." As Raphael's arms wrapped around me, holding me against his heart, I finally understood what true safety felt like. Not the protection of guards and guns, but the security of being cherished by a man willing to change his entire world for love. 6 months later, sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows of St. Bartholomew's Chapel, casting rainbow patterns across the stone floor, where I stood in a simple but elegant ivory gown. The chapel was small, intimate, exactly what Raphael and I had wanted for our wedding. No crowds, no media attention, just the people who mattered most. Sophia stood beside me as my maid of honor, her green eyes sparkling with excitement as she clutched a bouquet of white roses and baby's breath. She wore a pale pink dress that made her look like a little princess, her dark curls crowned with a delicate flower wreath that Raphael had insisted on personally selecting. "You look beautiful, Mommy," she whispered, straightening my simple veil with the serious concentration she brought to everything important. "So do you, sweetheart," I replied, my voice thick with emotion. In 6 months, our lives had transformed beyond recognition. The scared, broken woman who'd fled Derek's violence felt like a distant memory. In her place stood someone stronger, more confident, deeply loved. The chapel doors opened, and Raphael appeared at the altar. My breath caught as it always did when I saw him. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, his storm-gray eyes fixed on mine with an intensity that made my pulse race. But it was the expression on his face, pure adoration mixed with something almost reverent, that made tears blur my vision. As I walked down the short aisle, Raphael's eyes never left mine. When I reached him, he took my hands in his larger ones, and I felt that familiar electric current pass between us. "You're breathtaking," he murmured, so only I could hear. The ceremony was brief, but meaningful. We'd written our own vows, and when Raphael spoke about promising to love and protect both Sophia and me for the rest of his life, his voice broke slightly. When I promised to build a future with him based on trust, love, and family, Sophia reached up to squeeze both our hands, making the small congregation of Vincent, the household staff, and a few of Raphael's closest associates smile through their tears. The moment Father McKenna pronounced us husband and wife, Raphael cupped my face in his hands and kissed me with such tenderness that the chapel seemed to fade away entirely. When we broke apart, Sophia launched herself into our arms, creating a three-way hug that felt like the seal on our new beginning. "Now you're really my papa forever," Sophia declared against Raphael's shoulder, making him close his eyes briefly as emotion overwhelmed him. "Forever and always, Principessa," he promised. The reception was held at the mansion, which had been transformed for the occasion. The ballroom glowed with soft lighting and white flowers, but the real magic was in the faces of the people celebrating with us. Vincent, who'd become like a grandfather to Sophia, dabbed at his eyes with a handkerchief. The household staff, who'd watched our unconventional love story unfold, beamed with genuine happiness. But it was the private moment Raphael and I shared in his study, now our study, that meant the most. As the party continued downstairs, he'd pulled me away for a quiet conversation. "Happy?" he asked, his arms encircling my waist as we swayed to the distant music. "Completely," I replied, meaning it with every fiber of my being. "Are you? Any regrets about the changes you've made?" Over the past 6 months, Raphael had systematically transferred his family's illegal operations to trusted associates, while focusing on legitimate businesses. The restaurants, real estate developments, and import companies were thriving under his attention. More importantly, he seemed lighter, more at peace than when I'd first met him. "My only regret is that it took me 35 years to find you and Sophia," he said, pressing a gentle kiss to my temple. Everything else was just preparation for this life. The transformation hadn't been without challenges. Some of his associates had questioned his decisions initially, but Raphael's reputation and careful transition planning had smoothed most difficulties. He'd also surprised me by genuinely embracing a more conventional lifestyle, attending Sophia's school events, taking family vacations, even learning to cook simple meals when he wanted to give the staff time off. "Speaking of Sophia," I said with a smile, "she's been asking some very pointed questions about when she might get a baby brother or sister." Raphael's eyes darkened with an intensity that made my breath catch. "And what have you told her?" "That these things take time," I replied teasingly, "but maybe not too much time." His sharp intake of breath was audible. "Joanne, are you saying—" "I'm saying that Dr. Martinez confirmed it yesterday. Sophia's going to be a big sister in about 7 months." For a moment, Raphael simply stared at me in stunned silence. Then he swept me into his arms, spinning me around as his face broke into the most genuine smile I'd ever seen from him. "A baby," he whispered against my hair. "Our baby. Are you happy?" I asked, suddenly nervous. We'd discussed children in abstract terms, but the reality was different. "I'm beyond happy. I'm grateful, blessed, completely overwhelmed with love for you." He set me down gently, his hands immediately moving to rest protectively over my still flat stomach. "Does Sophia know?" "Not yet. I wanted to tell you first. But I think she suspects something. She's been extra clingy lately, and she asked me yesterday if I felt sick because I was growing a person like her friend's mom." Raphael laughed, the sound rich and joyful. "She's too smart for her own good. She gets that from her father," I said, meaning him completely, because that's what he was now. Sophia's father, in every way that mattered. The evening wound down with Sophia falling asleep in Raphael's arms, as we sat by the fireplace in our renovated family wing. He'd transformed an entire section of the mansion into a warm, comfortable space designed around family life, rather than intimidating grandeur. Soft sofas, built-in bookshelves filled with children's literature, a play area where Sophia could spread out her art projects. It was everything I'd never dared to dream of. "I should put her to bed," Raphael murmured, but made no move to disturb our sleeping daughter. "In a minute," I said, settling more comfortably against his free arm. "I love watching you two together." "She saved me," Raphael said quietly. "That night in the restaurant, when she ran up to my table asking for help, she saved my soul without even knowing it." "You saved each other," I corrected. "You showed her what a real father looks like, what unconditional love and protection feel like." Outside the windows, snow had begun to fall, blanketing the grounds in pristine white. The mansion felt like a fortress, but not the cold, intimidating kind it had once been. Now it was a sanctuary filled with love, laughter, and the promise of new life growing within me. "Do you ever think about Derek anymore?" Raphael asked unexpectedly. I considered the question seriously. "Sometimes, but not with fear or anger. He's just a shadow from a past life, a cautionary tale about how wrong things can go when you ignore red flags. What he did to Michael, what he planned for Sophia and me, it's just proof of how precious this life we've built really is. Raphael's arm tightened around me protectively. He can never hurt any of us again. I know, and I'm grateful for what you did to ensure that, even if we never speak of it directly. As if sensing our conversation, Sophia stirred in Raphael's arms, her green eyes fluttering open. Are we going to live happily ever after now? She asked with the simple directness of childhood. Raphael and I exchanged a look over her head, communicating without words the depth of our love and commitment. Yes, Principessa, Raphael said softly. We're going to live happily ever after. And as Sophia smiled sleepily and snuggled back into his arms, I knew he was right. Our fairy tale hadn't started with a princess in a tower or a knight in shining armor. It had started with a terrified mother and daughter asking a dangerous stranger for help. But the ending, this perfect moment of peace, love, and family, was more beautiful than any storybook could have imagined. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new adventures. But tonight, wrapped in Raphael's arms with our daughter safe between us and our unborn child growing beneath my heart, I had everything I'd ever wanted and more than I'd ever dared to dream. We were home. We were safe. We were loved. And Derek Collins was nothing more than a bad dream that could never touch us again.